The grand piano stood like a forgotten king in the corner of the executive lounge, its ebony surface gleaming under the dim chandelier light, untouched for years, a relic of opulence in a world of cold ambition. On the 47th floor of Sterling Enterprises, where glass walls reflected the glittering Manhattan skyline, the piano was a silent witness to the endless parade of power plays and corporate conquests. But tonight, it was about to sing a story that would shatter the icy heart of the company's CEO, Eleanor Sterling, and rewrite the life of a janitor named Amos, whose calloused hands held secrets no one in that towering empire could have imagined. It began with a challenge, a flippant remark thrown like a gauntlet in a room full of executives. "If you play Chopin, I'll marry you," Eleanor had said, her voice dripping with mockery, never expecting the janitor mopping the floor to pause, look up, and respond with a silence so profound it seemed to stop time itself. "If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of the human spirit, please hit that like button, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, share this story with someone who needs it, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks for more stories that remind us what truly matters. Don't forget to comment below. We'd love to hear how this story touches you." Amos Carter was invisible, or so he thought. At 58, with graying hair tucked under a faded baseball cap and a stooped posture from years of hauling mops and brooms, he blended into the background of Sterling Enterprises like a shadow. The executives in their tailored suits never noticed him as he emptied their trash cans or polished the glass conference tables. To them, he was just the janitor, a fixture as unremarkable as the potted plants or the hum of the air conditioning. But Amos carried a weight far heavier than the cleaning supplies he pushed through the halls. His heart was a museum of losses, a wife taken by cancer, a daughter estranged by years of his own mistakes, and a dream buried so deep it felt like a betrayal to even think of it. Once, long ago, Amos had been a pianist, his fingers dancing across keys with a passion that could make audiences weep. He had studied at Juilliard, his name whispered as a prodigy, but life had a way of grinding dreams into dust. A single bad decision, a night of drinking that led to a car accident, had cost him his scholarship, his reputation, and nearly his life. The scars on his hands, hidden beneath worn gloves, were a daily reminder of the music he'd left behind. Eleanor Sterling, on the other hand, was the opposite of invisible. At 42, she was a titan in the corporate world, her name synonymous with ruthless precision. Sterling Enterprises, a conglomerate built by her father, thrived under her command, its profits soaring while her personal life withered. She was beautiful in a way that intimidated, sharp cheekbones, piercing blue eyes, and a presence that demanded attention, but her heart was a fortress, walled off by years of betrayal and ambition. Her marriage had collapsed a decade ago, her friends were few, and her only companion was the relentless drive to stay on top. The piano in the executive lounge was her father's, a gift from a time when music had been his escape. Eleanor hated it. To her, it was a symbol of weakness, a reminder of her father's softness that she'd vowed never to inherit. She kept it there to prove a point. Sentimentality had no place in her empire. That night, at the company's annual gala, with champagne flutes clinking and executives vying for her approval, she'd made the remark about Chopin as a joke, a barb aimed at a junior executive who dared to flirt with her. The room had laughed, a chorus of sycophants, but Amos, standing in the shadows with his mop, had stopped cold. The challenge hung in the air, and Amos felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in decades. His hands trembled as he gripped the mop handle, the gloves hiding the scars that throbbed with the memory of keys under his fingertips. He didn't know why Eleanor's words hit him so hard. Maybe it was the mockery in her voice, the way it echoed the taunts of his past, or maybe it was the piano itself, calling to him like an old friend. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at her, his brown eyes steady, and the room fell silent. Eleanor's smile faltered, her gaze locking with his, and for a moment, the world shrank to just the two of them. Then, without a word, Amos set down his mop, walked to the piano, and sat on the bench. The executives gasped, some snickering, expecting a spectacle of failure. Eleanor crossed her arms, her expression a mix of curiosity and disdain. But when Amos removed his gloves, revealing hands crisscrossed with scars, the room grew quieter still. He began to play. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major flowed from the piano like a river breaking free after years of drought. The notes were soft at first, tentative, as if Amos were testing whether his hands still remembered. But as the melody unfolded, his fingers found their old rhythm, each note a brushstroke painting a story of love and loss, of dreams shattered and rebuilt. The music was raw, unpolished, but it carried a weight that no one could ignore. Executives who had been laughing moments before stood frozen, their champagne glasses forgotten. Eleanor's arms dropped to her sides, her breath catching as the music reached into the fortress of her heart and pried it open. Amos played with his eyes closed, his face a map of pain and redemption, and for those few minutes, the 47th floor was no longer a corporate battlefield but a sanctuary where every note told a truth no one dared speak. When the final note faded, the silence was deafening. Amos opened his eyes, his hands trembling as they rested on the keys. He didn't look at Eleanor or the crowd. He stood, put his gloves back on, and picked up his mop, ready to disappear into the shadows again. But Eleanor's voice cut through the silence. "Who are you?" she asked, her tone not commanding but vulnerable, as if she was seeing him for the first time. Amos didn't answer. He just nodded, his eyes meeting hers briefly before he turned and left the room. The executives erupted into whispers, but Eleanor stood rooted, her mind racing. She had expected a joke, a failure, anything but this. The music had undone her, cracking the armor she'd spent years building. She didn't know it yet, but that night was the beginning of a journey that would change them both. The next day, Eleanor couldn't focus. Her meetings felt hollow, her decisions mechanical. She kept hearing the nocturne in her head, seeing Amos's scarred hands, his quiet dignity. She asked her assistant to find him, to learn everything about the janitor who had silenced her room. What she discovered shook her further. Amos Carter wasn't just a janitor. He was a man who had once been destined for greatness, whose talent had been praised in concert halls before life broke him. His file was thin. A few employment records, a mention of a criminal charge from decades ago, long since cleared, but it was enough to spark her curiosity. She summoned him to her office, expecting to meet a broken man she could easily dismiss. Instead, she found a quiet strength. Amos stood before her desk, his cap in his hands, his eyes steady but guarded. She asked about the music, about his past, but he answered in short, careful sentences, as if protecting something fragile. "I used to play," he said. "Not anymore." When she pressed, asking why he'd stopped, he looked at her with an intensity that made her flinch. "Some things hurt too much to keep," he said, and left it at that. Eleanor couldn't let it go. She started finding excuses to see him, to talk to him. She'd linger in the lounge after hours, hoping he'd be there cleaning. She'd ask him questions about music, about Chopin, about the pieces he loved. At first, Amos was reluctant, his answers clipped, but over weeks, he began to open up. He told her about his wife, Leela, who had loved his playing, who had believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. He spoke of his daughter, Sarah, who hadn't spoken to him in years, not since the accident that had cost him everything. Each conversation was a thread, weaving a connection between two people who seemed to have nothing in common. Eleanor, who had always prided herself on control, found herself unraveling. She started listening to Chopin at home, alone in her penthouse, the music stirring emotions she'd buried long ago. She began to see Amos not as a janitor but as a man who had lived a life fuller and more painful than her own. For Amos, Eleanor was a mystery. He didn't trust her at first. Her world of wealth and power was alien to him, a reminder of the life he'd lost. But her persistence, her genuine curiosity, chipped away at his defenses. One night, after everyone else had left the building, she asked him to play again. He hesitated, his hands shaking as he sat at the piano. This time, he played a different piece, Chopin's Ballad No. 1, its stormy passion mirroring the turmoil in his heart. Eleanor sat nearby, her eyes glistening, and when he finished, she didn't speak. She just reached out and touched his hand, her fingers tracing the scars. It was the first time anyone had touched him with kindness in years, and it broke something inside him. He told her everything, the accident, the guilt, the years of running from his past. She listened, not as a CEO but as a woman who understood loss, who knew what it was to build walls to keep the pain at bay. Their unlikely friendship grew, a quiet rebellion against the roles they were expected to play. Eleanor started to change. She softened, her decisions at work less ruthless, her interactions more human. She began to question the empire she'd built, wondering if it was worth the cost. Amos, too, began to heal. Playing the piano again, even in stolen moments, rekindled a spark he thought was gone. He started writing letters to his daughter, pouring his heart into words he wasn't sure she'd ever read. But the past wasn't done with either of them. Eleanor's board of directors grew restless, sensing weakness in her newfound softness. They whispered about replacing her, about her distraction with the janitor. Amos faced his own battles, a health scare that forced him to confront his mortality, and the fear that his daughter would never forgive him. The climax came at the next company gala, a year after that fateful night. The piano was still there, and so was the tension between Eleanor and her board. Rumors of her connection with Amos had spread, twisted into scandal by those who wanted her gone. She stood before the crowd, her speech prepared, but instead of delivering it, she turned to Amos, who was in the back, as always, with his mop. "Play," she said, her voice carrying across the room. The executives murmured, some smirking, but Amos didn't hesitate this time. He sat at the piano and played Chopin's waltz in C-sharp minor, its delicate notes a defiance of the cynicism around them. As he played, Eleanor spoke, not to the crowd but to him, her words a confession of how his music, his story, had changed her. She didn't care about the board, the rumors, or the empire. She cared about the man who had reminded her what it meant to feel. When the music ended, the room was silent again, but this time, it was a different kind of silence, one of awe, of respect. Eleanor stepped down as CEO that night, choosing a life that felt true over one that glittered. Amos didn't marry her, the challenge had been a jest, after all, but he found something better. A letter arrived from Sarah, his daughter, who had heard about the gala, about the janitor who played Chopin. She wanted to see him, to talk, to try again. Amos and Eleanor stood together outside the building that night, the city lights stretching out before them, two people who had found each other in the most unexpected way, their scars no longer just wounds but proof they had survived. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the power of music, kindness, or second chances, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs it, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks for more stories that lift us up. And please, leave a comment below, tell us how this story moved you, or share your own story of redemption. Your words could inspire someone else. The piano remained in the lounge, no longer a relic but a symbol of what could be. Amos played it sometimes, late at night, when the building was empty. Eleanor would listen, her heart full, knowing that life wasn't about the empire you built but the music you made along the way. And somewhere, in a small apartment across the city, Sarah listened to Chopin, her father's music echoing in her heart, a promise of a new beginning.